Hello and welcome back to Perspectives. And on today's show, whilst justice is finally served for the female doctor raped and murdered in Calcutta, India's sex crime epidemic against women continues unabated as a female teenage athlete implicates over 60 men in gang raping her since she was 12 years old in Kerala. As a result, never more has the Khalistan movement found a greater argument to break away from Narendra Modi's society, failing its women and indeed the rule of law. Meanwhile, Kangana Ranaut's fabricated tribute to another symbol of India's dark history, Indira Gandhi, continues to face boycotts globally. And in California, Khalistan's standard-bearer and Sikh rights activist Bapu Surat Singh Khalsa will be finally laid to rest in 3 days. We'll take a quick look at the arrangements and indeed, for our non-Sikh audience, give a quick insight into what's involved in a traditional Sikh funeral. Well, all this and more on today's show, but joining me as always for Perspectives is our very own correspondent in Canada, James Cousineau. Good morning, James.
Good morning, Angus, and good morning to our amazing viewers out there. We have hit a record for yesterday's show. In the first 19 hours, we've had over 13,000 views of yesterday's show, so we appreciate that. 551 likes, and then a staggering 111 comments, folks. Thank you very much. We appreciate you taking the time to not only watch, but to interact with us, because it's as much your show as it is ours. So again, thank you very much. Don't forget to share it, and also remember to subscribe to the show so you can keep up to date as new episodes are released. And thanks again. We do appreciate you.
We certainly do. And James and I together will be bringing you our perspectives on today's show on the daily news affecting the Sikh community across the world. And yes, we will indeed be taking a look at a few of your great comments which have been filling up below the videos at the end of the show. So do stay tuned for that. Now, James, let's get the show underway. What are you going to start us off with this morning?
Well, some people are satisfied and other people seem to be disappointed at the sentence that's been handed down for the man convicted of raping and murdering a doctor in a Calcutta City hospital. Now, we're very familiar with the story. Angus and I both covered this in great length, not only the horrific incident in itself, but also the resulting strikes that took place by medical workers and the group of doctors that are still outraged that the punishment is only life in jail. Others wanted to see him actually hang for that crime. The whole issue sent an outrage not only throughout India, but it made the international news and really shined a light down on the fact that there is a major issue with rape and violence towards women within that country. Now, of course, we know that this has been a very big case, but it is an issue that's been going on for decades and decades. And we'll get to that in just a few minutes. But let's get back to this story, is that the individual is still maintaining his innocence. He is just beside himself, as is his family. They believe that it is unjust, not just in the investigation, but in the entire judicial process. So they are arguing it still. What the family says here is that they were shocked by the sentence. We will continue our fight and won't let investigations stop. Come what may, we will fight for justice. And that was the woman's father who told the AFP news agency. Indian law prohibits revealing the identity of victims of sexual violence and that of their family members, which is a great law in such an archaic system. I'm glad to see that they at least have common sense on that law, because there is a need to protect the victims. They are shunned, they are shamed, they are made outcasts at times. So it's important to remember that. Now, immediately after the sentencing, dozens of doctors protested outside of the courthouse, saying they were not satisfied with the investigation nor the sentence. The trainee doctor's murder last August at the state-run hospital in Calcutta in West Bengal state sent shockwaves across the country, as we've already stated. As you may or may not be aware, the 31-year-old had gone to sleep in the seminar hall at the medical college and hospital after a night shift. She was getting her rest before the next shift and being on call. Now, her half-naked body and being severely injured was discovered near a podium by a colleague. The just the horrific way and the violence that happened right inside of the hospital just sent shockwaves and protests from coast to coast in India by healthcare workers. And it is, as I said, resulted in strikes nationwide, and that was just the beginning of it. The world demanded change as well because it had gone to the international press. The government and the CBI, the Central Bureau of Investigation, felt a lot of pressure to resolve the case quickly, and that may have led in some shortcuts being taken in the investigation. So that is just something that has to be worked out still in terms of whether or not this person has been falsely implicated in the case. But again, it is just very interesting that they also claim there were others involved in the crime, and yet nothing has come of that in terms of criminal charges or prosecutions. Some politicians and social media users criticized the sentence, and they said, for example, one of the chief ministers in West Bengal said she was not satisfied with the court's order. We want justice. Such criminals should be hanged. And that is the sentiment of a lot of people, not just in Calcutta, but across the country, and people weighing in on social media. Now, here you can see that this is something that has really gotten the community and the country mobilized to try to make things better for women and to make it safer, especially for medical and healthcare workers and others in the community that are taking on positions to help others, and yet they are subjected to these types of just heinous acts of violence and assaults, Angus. It's just disgusting. And it's good to see that it did move quickly in terms of the justice. But the question is, Angus, did it move too quickly?
Yes, I think there are, well, the various elements to this case which obviously raise a lot of concerns. I mean, firstly, the situation itself, this dreadful attack on this woman. We talked a lot about it at the time, and we did talk at great length about this endemic issue in India of sex crimes, sex attacks against women. And women are particularly vulnerable in India. And as we said at the time, and we obviously continue to say, is this was a doctor, somebody, a professional woman, highly educated, very well qualified, a very upstanding member of society who's been brutally attacked and murdered in such a manner. And that is very indicative, very symptomatic of the problem in India. But as we always say when we talk about this case, this is just one of so many cases that occur in India. And it's reached a huge audience because it was a doctor. But what about the thousands or tens of thousands of other women who are attacked on a literally a daily basis? There are rapes on a daily basis. I think it's every hour or whatever that a woman is raped in India. And particularly those women who are lower down in society, caste-wise, particularly the Dalit women who are attacked on a regular basis, sexually attacked as well as physically attacked. Their cases never reach the public eye. People don't hear their cases. Their voices are never heard, and yet sex crimes against those women occur on a regular basis. So there's always this double standard saying, well, you only care if it's a doctor. What about these poor women in the lower caste who are attacked on a regular basis? Which unfortunately, then you start looking at those, does start to unpeel the layers of Indian society and the problems of Indian society, and of course this caste system. But there you go, we talk about it regularly. But as I've always said, and when we always come back to the same old story, the problem, and of course people are taking to the streets. The problem is not so much Indian society itself. It's actually the governance of India. It's the ruling class of India are not sorting this problem out, because the overwhelming majority of Indians are disgusted by this. This is why they are taking to the streets in their thousands, saying, look, you've got to stop this. It is a small minority of men, but these men think they have a free rein to go out and attack women. And the only way that is ever going to stop is that society is managed properly. The government steps in and does something about it. It will take probably a generation, because it requires a complete re-education of Indian men to understand at the moment a large percentage of Indian men treat women as second-class citizens, unlike the Sikh community, who have always, since the beginning of Sikhi, have treated women as equals on every level and every basis. Unfortunately, within Hindu society and actually other societies, women are treated as second-class citizens. They are treated as inferior. And that mindset then engenders bigger problems like sex attacks, because so many men think it's okay to attack a woman in any form, in any physical way. Because the punishments are not there. Society does not treat it as the crime that it actually is. And so this is why it occurs, because men think it's okay and they know they can get away with it. And that is an endemic problem that can only be stamped out through a complete re-education of Indian society. And that can only happen from the top downwards. It must come from the government. It must be introduced in education, in societal education, and literally as young Indians are brought up through school, they must be taught to treat women equally, as indeed is the basis of Sikhi. They must follow that same basis, that women must be treated as equals on every form. And that will at least begin to turn this dreadful tide of violence against women in India. And how often have we had to report this same old story? And okay, all that aside, let's get on to this other element here. That is the talk of justice, because of course we're going to talk about the same story in your next story, James. Is actually justice has been seen to be served? Actually, has it? And this again raises questions and concerns. Have they got the right man? I don't know. One can assume and one can hope that we have, but there is always that element of doubt, because of course the Indian government, the Indian judicial system and the law enforcement were under an enormous amount of pressure, not just domestically but internationally, because this story reached international mainstream media. There's a huge amount of pressure to find somebody, to nail it on somebody and get, or at least visually, to see that justice has been done. So they've been under that pressure. They've found somebody. They've pinned a charge on him, and they've now sentenced him. But it does, because it's been rushed through. How often do we hear this, where we're under pressure to find somebody to pin a crime on, as they've found the wrong man? They've just basically found somebody who just about fits the bill. So right, you're guilty. It's steamrolled through, and that person is charged and sentenced. And then it subsequently turns out actually it was a wrong conviction. And this is why I'm slightly concerned about the calls for a death sentence, because of course a death sentence is irreversible. If in fact it turns out subsequently they have in fact got the wrong man, if you've hanged him, it's a bit late, and that poor innocent soul has lost his life. So that's why in cases like this, I have to say I'm not a supporter of the death penalty. In cases where it is absolutely without doubt and indisputable, and certainly in cases, for example, terrorism or mass murder or serial killers, whatever, I actually have to say I am a supporter of the death sentence, but I'm not overall a supporter of the death sentence, because there are too many miscarriages of justice. I'm not looking just at India in this. Of course, it happens in the West, unfortunately, on a too regular basis, which is why I'm not a huge fan of the death penalty. But certainly in this case, I think there is a big enough question about the process of law that's been followed. And how often, James, have we talked about the failings of the Indian judicial system and the legal system? There are too many holes, there are too many weaknesses, there are too many mistakes made, there are too many deliberate agendas that create deliberate mistakes going on in the Indian judiciary and the law enforcement process, that makes me hesitate to say no. I don't think the death sentence is valid in this case. It is a terrible crime. A sentence must be huge, but I'm not a fan of the death sentence in this case, because I am wondering, there is always that element of doubt. Has this process just been a little bit too quick? Is there a danger that they might have got the wrong man for this case? I don't know, James, but yeah, again, just the whole case. Here we are again, sadly. It's yet another sex crime against women. One day I hope we can report that there is an improvement, there is a change in trend in this dreadful area of crime.
Yeah, and it should be noted too that over the last several years there has been some change to the judicial system and the definition of the crime to try and cut down on the assaults against women. But in many areas, because of the unrest and the civil issues that are facing the country, it really hasn't brought that down. And we'll get into that in a bit. But just on the screen before I switch over here, I just wanted to show the areas here. And you can see as they get darker, but this is per 100,000 residents in India. So you can see how it changes color there. But Delhi is at 43.6 per 100,000 people. So that is just an astronomical level when you take into account that the National Crime Records Bureau estimates that 71% of assaults do not even get reported. And so that's just a phenomenal number when you take that into account. It's just unheard of. And that leads us to another story that's getting just major international attention on both social media and otherwise, and rightfully so, because this one involves a huge number of people that I just look at it and I was shocked, horrified, and just disgusted at this story, Angus. And that is that this poor girl who was an athlete was constantly over and over victimized by gang rapes, blackmail, and violence. And this was, people who had perpetrated this act against her when she was a very young teenager and continued on throughout her life. And they would bring friends and grab her and throw her in the car and take her to abandoned buildings or wherever. And they would all take turns with this poor young lady. And she is now at a point where the charges and the police have actually moved forward with dealing with the case. And it's estimated that there were 60 people involved in this one poor girl's life that assaulted her, whether it was through individual or gang rapes and otherwise. It is just horrifying to think that if I had a daughter, or say my granddaughter, was subjected to such horrific acts, I just don't know what I would do. I mean, I would just be beyond able to handle that, because, where are the police? Where are the laws? Where is the confidence in the system that allows this poor girl to go so long without the intervention of law enforcement or anybody else? I mean, you've got 60 individuals that took part in this. How can it continue for years upon years? How can she not feel that she can go to police authorities or her family to say, hey, this is what's going on, help me? Like, the cries of help must have been there. It is just staggering and heartbreaking. I just can't believe that it continued that way. Now, they do expect more arrests to take place. They also say that there is a 25-member police team that is probing this case and working to make sure that they collect all the scientific evidence in the registered cases. Now, of course, being that it's been going on for years, there may be limited scientific DNA or other bits of evidence that have been lost over that time, but we can only hope that they get the majority of these perpetrators and lock them up, because what they did to this poor young girl, her life is destroyed forever. And for her to still be continuing day by day to fight back, to regain her power, I mean, the strength and resilience of this young lady should never be understated. I mean, they blackmailed her, they assaulted her. He brought, some of them brought friends and they all took turns. And, there's another incident in February last year where this individual picked her up in a car from a bus stand with two of his friends, and they joined them in the same car, and three others followed in a rickshaw. And then they took her somewhere else to take advantage of the situation, we'll say, to put it politely. But again, to just imagine that this is going on in today's world, it is just unbelievable and unacceptable at any level. Now, when we look at the different areas of India, you can break it down to the number of kidnapping and abductions to compel for marriage versus the procurement of minors for other illicit activities, we'll say. And this is according to Human Rights Watch, that projected that more than 7,200 minors, 1.6 out of every 100,000, are raped each year in India. Among these victims who reported the assaults are alleged to suffer mistreatment and humiliation from police. And that, again, is why the numbers of reporting are so low. And that is because they are just treated like garbage if they speak out and try to get help. It's just not acceptable. Now, minor girls are trafficked into prostitution in India. The rape of minors conflates into a lifetime of suffering. I mean, they get used over and over and over. And it is just unheard of, the levels that people go to take advantage of others. But it's also some of the gangs who are taking advantage of these individuals and basically are using them to make money and as a commodity, which is just unbelievable. And here is a chart here that demonstrates certain areas. And again, it shows the difference in different regions where reporting is and isn't done, or where people feel safe to report, or where the reports are actually filed and taken care of. So it just shows a whole list of the different areas. On the left, of course, is kidnapping and abduction. Right is the procurement of a minor for sexual purposes. And again, that includes the human trafficking that not only takes place in that region, but it can be trafficking to other locations around the world. Now, the UN estimates that 89% of sexual assaults are unreported in a study they did of 57 countries. That did not include India, but that just shows that the international level, how far we need to go to educate and raise awareness, but also to look at what else can be done to protect women and children in our society. In India, for example, only 1 in 4 of the cases that is actually reported and goes through the court system results in a conviction. So it shows the disparity there. In Jammu and Kashmir, allegations of mass rapes by Indian armed forces as well as the Islamic State. So again, it's areas where there's a lot of strife, where there's a lot of upheaval and a lot of conflict, where they think that they can get away with this because there is so much fear already and the retaliation is real. You can go back, as I said, this has been going on for decades, and you can go back to 1947 during partition when over 100,000 women had claimed to have been kidnapped and raped. So it's not a new issue. It is something that has been going on for 80 years that needs to be getting into control, under control, and people need to change their attitudes. And I think that is one big argument in favor of Khalistan, is because the Sikh community not only treats women as equals, but they stand up for those who are vulnerable, those who are being abused, not only in their own community, but as a whole. It doesn't matter if they're Muslim, if they're Christian, if they're Sikh, or anything. The Sikh people will stand up and protect them, and I think that is where you really see a benefit to Khalistan, because they can be a leader, they can be a pillar of hope for all these victims in the future. And and of course they do state that the Delhi Commission for Women claimed that 53% of cases were false accusations. Again, this is not taking into account how many of the women reported that they were threatened with violence or their family were threatened with violence and other issues that made them drop the case. So they didn't really do a proper investigation and assessment. So that number of false accusations is extremely, extremely high when you take into the reality of it on how many of these are false versus how many are threatened and coerced to not follow through. And, some of the reasons that there would be false accusations made is women, of course, and I'm just saying in general that the reasons they found was that women are forced into marriage. So sometimes they will use it as a tool to force a man into marriage. They may use it for financial gain and extortion purposes. They may use it as a retaliatory way of getting back at a man who they feel slighted them. But overall, I think the 53% is just off the charts, Angus. I don't think that number is accurate. I think it's far less of cases that are falsely reported. I think that percentage is way too high.
Yes, I think when you examine the facts and the statistics in this area, it's really shocking, and it clearly does imply a serious endemic problem in Indian society. And it's when we look at all these stories and the reports and the statistics, it's very clear. If you hold up India to a lens and you look at Indian society, it's very dark. There is a very dark stain across the society. Because these attacks, and particularly this one in Kerala, is actually a prime example of this. Quite often, it's not lone wolves, it's not lone criminals. These are not just simple criminal attacks that, for example, in the West or any country on Earth, there are lone wolf criminal attacks against women. Rapes do occur, unfortunately. It's a sad fact of humanity. But they tend to be, in most countries, and certainly here in the West, they are lone criminals, usually with a mental problem, frankly. And but that's a very identifiable problem, and it is dealt with appropriately by law enforcement in our own nations. But in India, this is something different. This is something cultural. It is something endemic. This isn't just lone wolves. These are actually groups of men who feel as a group that it is okay to attack women or single women of any age, literally of any age. These are gang rapes. And how often have we reported about gang rapes? And this Kerala story is just one of how many that have occurred. And this implies something different. And you touched upon it there in your report, James. It's usually outside of India. It's usually areas like war zones that mass rapes and mass attacks like this happen, because men and the bad end of men, let's call it in simplistic terms, the bad element in the male section of society feel they can get away with it. So they do. They know they can get away with it. So they group together like a gang of animals, but I think that's an insult to animals. But they get together and they perpetrate these crimes, and because they know they can get away with it in something like a war zone. India is not a war zone. India is supposedly a society that is vying to become a future superpower. It is supposedly a democracy. It is supposedly a society that operates under the rule of law. Yet we are seeing actions perpetrated by these men that belong in war zones. And unfortunately, as I said at the beginning, this is a cultural problem. It is endemic. It is actually embedded in Indian society. And that is, I think, the key issue here, where men, as I've said earlier, large groups of men, think it is okay to groom and attack and sexually assault young women. And when I say young women, I'm talking about teenagers, young girls. Now, this in itself implies a very, very serious problem with India and Indian society. And as I said earlier, the only way this can ever be dealt with, this cannot be dealt with after the event. That is not working. You've actually got to look before these events happen. You've got to look at prevention. Prevention is better than actually treating the event afterwards. Sentencing these animals, again, it's an insult to animals, but sentencing these criminals afterwards, yeah, fine, they're punished, but that's not stopping it happening again and again and again, because this problem just keeps occurring. And so I think the real issue here is it's got to focus, and the Indian government has got to get off its backside and start focusing on preventing this happening in the first place. And again, this, as I said before, this comes back to education and changing Indian culture. It's got to come from every level. It's got to be a multilateral approach. It's got to start literally in the schools. It's got to start educating the young in India across the whole of Indian society, whatever their background, whatever their ethnicity, whatever their religion. And I'm afraid Sikhi doesn't fall into this, because Sikhi educates their young from birth to treat women as equal. So I think we're particularly aiming this lens at other parts of India, other communities in India. But this is where it has to start. The problem also is endemic in the police system. We reported not that long ago about the daughter of an army officer who was sexually assaulted in a police station by the police. She came in to report a crime and was sexually assaulted by the police. So, James, when you say that 89% of these crimes are estimated to go unreported, well, we know why. It's because if you go into a police station to report a crime, there is a danger that you yourself will get raped by the very police that you were reporting the crime to. And again, that is symptomatic. That is indicative of India's problem. It is embedded. Sex crime is a problem embedded in Indian culture. It's as simple as that. It has to stop, and it can only stop by a complete 180-degree reversal on how India operates as a society. It's got to be through education, through changing the whole culture of law enforcement, changing the culture of Indian society, changing the judicial view on this. Punishments have got to be harder, more severe. It's got to come in the prevention, educating the Indian man, the average Indian individual, saying it is not okay to treat women as second-class citizens. Women in not just India, but in fact globally, women are equal on every level to men, and they must be treated as such. And Indian men must grow up understanding this and taking it for granted, as we do in the West, that women are treated as equals on every level. And only then, and it will take a generation, unfortunately, but it has to start. I don't see any evidence of this starting. Narendra Modi has presided over an absolutely disgusting fall in standards and the treatment of women in India. This is going on a daily basis. So much of it's going unreported, and Narendra Modi's government is just not doing anything about it. It is not doing enough about it, and it has to change this. I think it's just deeply sad. And I'll give you another example of this problem and India's attitude towards women is recently, again, we reported on when there was a huge law change where some of the fundamental basis of law in India was changed to, again, remove it a step further away from the British colonial law that, of course, India inherited in 1947, and they kept a lot of that infrastructure, that legal infrastructure, because of course it worked and it was very good. But one of the things they didn't change was the law surrounding marital rape. And again, you touched on this in your report, James. Marital rape, to some degree, is still legal in India. They didn't prevent this. Whereas the rest of the world, or certainly the democratic world, it's very, very clear, unambiguous. Marital rape is a criminal offence. You cannot use the defence of being married to a woman against raping that woman. Yet in India, it is still the case that marital rape is still legal. And that, I think, is symptomatic of how India views its women. It's okay to rape a woman in marriage. It's okay to gang rape women because, well, that's our culture in India. We've always done it, so we'll always continue to do it. So again, I think that is very symptomatic of what the problem is. Indian society needs to change. I think is an absolute stain on the modern world. It does not belong. It doesn't even belong in the 18th century, never mind the 21st century. And India really needs to wake up. The Indian government really needs to get a grip on this and start turning Indian society around, James.
Absolutely. And we've got to give credit to organizations like Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch and the others that are reporting and trying to track this and raise awareness, because we know that they can be locked up because they are shining a bad light on India. They can be declared terrorists. They can be declared crimes against the state. So again, their bravery and their work that they are committed to, definitely we give our hats off to them. And keeping in mind that there are even lawmakers in the country that have been arrested and charged with rape, and then turn around and the father of the victim was beaten so bad he was hospitalized, and I mean he was beaten bad, Angus, and that was their way of trying to persuade the young lady from following through on her charges, and she was a minor. I mean, it's just unheard of, Angus. It's got to change.
It is appalling. And I didn't talk about grooming gangs. Of course, here in the UK, we've had a big issue about grooming gangs. And just to highlight the Sikh community's attitude on this, it was the Sikh community here in the UK who actually raised the fact of grooming gangs occurring. It was actually in the Muslim population, unfortunately, here in the UK. And British law enforcement did absolutely nothing about it. Despite knowing about it, it was the Sikh community who did raise, even 30 years ago, the issue of grooming gangs who were targeting and grooming young girls, teenage girls, and they were being effectively trafficked and used and abused, exactly like in this Kerala story. And it was a Sikh community who actually raised it 30 years ago. It's taken 30 years for the British finally to deal with it. But that issue actually came down to fears of being charged with racism. The police didn't act on it because they feared that by investigating the Islamic community, who were essentially the perpetrators of this, or a small element of the Islamic community, they would be accused of racism, and that was an issue. So yeah, certainly it has occurred here in the UK, and absolutely disgusting disgusting that it's occurred, and British society have turned on it, and there is a huge movement now to really obtain justice and investigations into this. But that is a very, very rare occasion here in the UK. So it does occur, unfortunately. But certainly in India, as I say, it's culturally endemic. It is nationwide across India. It is a massive problem that must be dealt with from a societal and governmental level. Anyway, James, let's move on now in the interest of time. Let's go back to the story I covered a couple of days ago. This is the film Kangana Ranaut's film Emergency, which, as we talked about, depicts it's this story. It's almost rewriting history. It's this very rose-tinted, spectacle view of Indira Gandhi and the life of Indira Gandhi. Basically, it's a massive piece of pro-Hindutva propaganda that was produced and directed and starring, yes, Kangana Ranaut, this Hindutva mouthpiece. And unsurprisingly, the protests right across the world outside of India have been gathering momentum. So I just wanted to provide a little update on this, because it's actually quite encouraging to see the movement and the activism that's been going on, the campaigning amongst the Sikh community, which is actually proven very, very successful. And over a dozen UK screenings of Emergency have been cancelled since last Friday. So in a week, at least a dozen screenings of it have been cancelled after nationwide Sikh protests. And it's part of actually a global campaign against the film's anti-Sikh content. And Sikh groups, in fact, across the world have been protesting at cinemas across all nations regarding last week's release of this film, which, of course, as I mentioned, is this biopic of Indira Gandhi. Because it has basically been seen as a piece of anti-Sikh propaganda. And more protests are expected to take place depending on whether cinemas then do decide to continue trying to show the film despite the protests. But cancellations have been reported across Melbourne in Australia, Toronto in Canada, here in the UK, Manchester, London, Birmingham, Slough, Staines and Telford, so right across the UK. And grassroots community groups include Sheer Punjab UK, AK Media and Sikh Army have been helping coordinate peaceful, that's an important word here, peaceful demonstrations against the film. And groups, including the Sikh Council of the UK, have called, of course, for the film to be banned. The activism involved in this actually has been a real, I would say, a masterclass in grassroots campaigning. It's been a very successful campaign, being pushed and coordinated by various activist groups, certainly here in the UK, but likewise their counterparts across North America and Australia and New Zealand. And the Sikh Army, for example, they posted up on their website or on their social media accounts. They said, during the Kisan protests, Kangana Ranaut was spreading hate on social media. Now she's created a film fueled by that same divisive mindset. Where is everyone from the Kisan Morcha now? Go to your local cinema, demand the cancellation of the film. If you need support in bringing together local Singhs and Kaurs, send us a DM and we'll share a WhatsApp link to help you coordinate and connect with others actively involved in the saver. So this actually is very indicative of what's going on behind the scenes, is that these small organisations are helping coordinate these campaigns, because of course the diaspora is spread out geographically and likewise, and it needs groups like the Sikh Army just to help coordinate these campaigns to ensure that everybody turns up at the right place at the right time to make sure that this activism, this campaign actually hits hard and hits where it needs to hit and have that effect that it needs to have. And it continues, in some instances, Sikh demonstrators usually masked, now this is important to what I'm going to talk about in a second, usually masked to help protect their identities based on Indian transnational repression targeting activists. In other words, they've had to hide their faces because of the threat from India. If they're identified, then of course we certainly here in the UK saw what happened to Avtar Singh Kandar, who was identified by the Hindutva mob and indeed Indian media. He then died under very suspicious circumstances shortly afterwards. So that is why many of the activists are turning up masked. And they have managed to see films cancelled through dialogue with cinema staff. So they've actually engaged the management of these cinemas directly. And of course, the management have said, yeah, OK, we understand your concerns, how offended the community is, so we will not show this film. So it's actually working. This engagement with the management is actually working. In some instances, though, where the films have actually been shown, Sikh groups have entered the showings to demonstrate as the film played, resulting in the showing actually ended up being cancelled midway through. So again, the protest protests, albeit a little bit more physically involved in the actual showing of the film, have actually had the intended consequence. But no arrests, no reports of violence or any incidents of note have been made. That's very important, again, to make that point. Protesters have stringently videoed much of these interactions, reflecting civil protest and clear explanations against film. So again, all these protests have been self-policed. In other words, many of the campaigners have videoed their protest deliberately as a self-protective mechanism to ensure that no spurious or malicious complaints or accusations can be made about any violence, etc. So they are ensuring that evidence is there to prove that all these protests are peaceful. That's it. Again, very important. Now, Jas Singh of the Sikh Press Association, and I met Jas on a couple of occasions. Solid guy, a great advocate in the Sikh community. He's made a statement to say that Emergency is viewed by Sikh groups as Indian state propaganda, not a film or art. It provably displays inaccurate information which maligns revered Sikh figures. Such content perpetuates anti-Sikh hate and Indian state stereotypes, demonising the community, which makes up approximately just 2% of India. So again, it's just highlighting it's only 2% of the Indian population. So why is it subjected to this enormous onslaught of propaganda and hatred from the Hindutva and Indian government? Again, it just highlights the fact of just how scared Hindutva and the RSS and by extension the Brahmins are of this tiny minority of the Indian population. Again, as I keep saying, it's a huge compliment to the Sikh community of just how powerful, how effective it is as a community, and what a threat it is to this Brahmanical control of India. Again, I really take my hat off to the Sikh community to have achieved something like this. The theatres showing this is Jas continuing. He says the theatres showing this nationalist propaganda are supporting something which poses a danger to Sikh communities today, justifying anti-Sikh hate, which is currently a major concern amidst an uptake in India's transnational violence. Etc., etc. So again, social media has actually been full, and all the Sikh community pages have been full of highlighting of what deeply divisive and dangerous propaganda this film is. And of course, Kangana Ranaut, this nemesis who we talk about on a regular basis, she is a BJP MP. I do tend to forget this. She is actually a sitting MP in the Lok Sabha for the BJP. So again, if nothing else, she is a political figure. Even if you put aside the RSS Hindutva element, she's an actual BJP politician, so she clearly has a political agenda in this film, never mind the anti-Sikh hatred or the RSS agenda. So she shouldn't really be producing films like this with such a heavy propaganda element. But anyway, that's another issue. For example, Mohammed Zubair posted up on social media, I'm going back a while now, he said, look, the hate monger Kangana Ranaut is now advocating genocide. She wants Sikh farmers to be crushed like mosquitoes. And again, this goes back to where Kangana Ranaut was so vocal during the farmers' protests that she was saying crush them like mosquitoes. She actually encouraged the police to literally exert violence on the protesters. And another one, the Sikh Press Association reminded us this wonderful story, James, that we actually had a bit of a chuckle about at the time, of the I Stand with Kulwinder Kaur movement. This wonderful lady in an airport in the Punjab who slapped Kangana Ranaut. Oh, it was Chandigarh Airport. She actually confronted Kangana Ranaut and slapped her for her disgusting behaviour and treatment of the Sikh community. And of course, that story went viral, and we actually had a bit of a chuckle at direct action. Not that we advocate violence, but it was actually quite a chuckling story. But anyway, one UK protester who wished to remain anonymous said, and this is again very typical of the protesters, but this sums up actually the feelings of the protesters: it is a disgrace that UK cinemas can show such films which are pure anti-Sikh propaganda from India. These businesses need to vet what they show better, because they're pushing hate against Sikhs. Thankfully, nearly all cinemas, or the staff, have understood our position and supported our stance in having the film removed from listings. It's unfair to these workers to have to defend Indian state propaganda. And I think that is an important point, because I think it just highlights that, look, they're just cinemas. They're just trying to make a living. They don't understand the political nuances or problems with these films. So don't blame these people and these cinemas. We have to turn our attention on the producers and distributors of these films, they're the people perpetuating this propaganda. All we need to do peacefully is remind the cinemas, look, this is a piece of propaganda. It's actually creating hatred. Please don't show it. And they are acquiescing to this. They are agreeing, actually, yes, you're right. So all credit to the cinemas for understanding the offence that these films are causing. And this protester action, this was going to lead on to what I'm about to say. This is an important point. This protester said, this is why most of us have chosen to remain anonymous. India targets Sikhs and even our families back in the Punjab. Look at what happened with Shahid Bhai Avtar Singh Kandar and Shahid Bhai Hardeep Singh Jar. We are choosing to remain as safe as possible whilst exercising our right to peaceful protest. This is why they're wearing masks, because they can't perpetuate their political views freely and without fear, because India, so-called democratic state, is a threat, is literally a physical, violent threat to their lives, as happened to Avtar Singh Kandar and Singh Najar. Singh Najar. And this is why, ridiculously, in a democratic society like the UK, they have to hide their faces because they fear India. They fear India's hit squads. When I was in Birmingham the other day outside the court, many of the protesters, no, they weren't protesters, they were just there just to show support. Many of the supporters were wearing masks for that very same reason. They were scared for their lives and their families back in the Punjab. This is what India does. It doesn't just target people in a democratic country like the UK who literally live in fear. It's their families back in the Punjab, because they know, as we've often talked about, is that these activists here in the West, their families who are in the Punjab, they are harassed, intimidated and even detained by the police in the Punjab, by the Indian government. It's an absolute appalling indictment of Indian society and its claims to be a democracy. And now the cinemas themselves have actually, they haven't, despite being asked for a comment, they haven't actually come out and commented on this. I think they're just saying, look, please just leave us out of this. I can't blame them for that. But just to follow on, and I think this is an interesting side issue on this story. There's a newspaper that particularly is popular in London, but it is a national newspaper, but it's focused around London. One of its headlines, there was an article written by one of their journalists, Brooke Davis, I think it's a young lady. It was headlined, "Masked men carrying knives storm London cinema shouting down with India." That's quite a scary headline. It implies like these terrorists, these psychopaths have stormed a London cinema shouting down with India. Well, actually, this is the story written about these protests. And I've very deliberately highlighted the points here about being masked, why these men are masked. And also, and I've particularly stressed the points why that all these protests have been peaceful, and I particularly stressed the point that these protests have been videoed for this very reason, to avoid malicious headlines, malicious misreporting, Hindutva activities, Hindutva social media accounts from abducting these stories and spinning them into something they're not. Here we have an example of the Metro newspaper, and I think actually, to be fair to the Metro, I don't think this was designed to be malicious. I think it was just ignorance. But this reporter, in terms of clickbait, said masked men carrying knives storm London cinema. Now, those knives that Brooke Davis, the journalist, was reporting about were, of course, the Kirpans. We've gone down this road before, James. They were carrying Kirpans because they were Amritdhari Sikhs, and as part of their articles of faith, they're carrying their Kirpans. So, as a result of this headline, the Sikh community and the Sikh Press Association launched a complaint, and they approached the Metro newspaper and said, look, no. You can't report this. This is a misleading and a false headline. Please change it. They sent a dozen, or the community as a whole sent dozens of complaints to the Metro, and the Metro newspaper did change its headline, as you can see. It went from masked men carrying knives to masked men storm London cinema shouting down with India. So again, it's not a great headline, but at least that nonsense about carrying knives, that very threatening headline and slightly misleading headline, has actually been removed. But this does show, I think, an inherent problem and a cultural problem in the UK that the Sikh community is constantly facing with the media. with journalism and sensationalist journalism, where it deliberately, provocatively frames a story, particularly when it relates to a minority group. It frames that story to be a little bit more sensationalist. And again, when you read that headline, masked men carrying knives storm a cinema shouting down with India, it's quite intimidating. It's quite scary. When in fact, in reality, on the ground, it was actually a very different story. It was a peaceful protest of Sikh men and women, actually, who turned up to protest against a very, very offensive film. So there you go, James. I am pleased to say that activism is alive and well here in the UK and across the diaspora. It is having an effect. This film, Emergency, is meeting a very, very hostile but peaceful response across the diaspora.
Yeah, and it doesn't seem that long ago, Angus, that we saw the same type of propaganda coming out of Canada when there were peaceful protests by the Sikh community, and the Hindutva media and others tried to misrepresent it and put it out to something that it definitely wasn't. So it's something that we've seen play out before. Now, Kanga Ranat, she has tried to play the victim, saying she doesn't understand why the film won't play in the Punjab, that she thinks it's an important educational and cultural film, and again, just trying to get the people talking about it. Again, if it's in the news, good or bad, it's going to create some desire for some people to want to see it. Now, this is interesting though, because in the opening weekend, it brought in, and I converted it to Canadian dollars, so approximately 1.7 million Canadian dollars in its first weekend, but that dropped significantly down Monday and Tuesday, respectively, to $174,000 and $178,000. So it shows that I think the protests and the awareness seem to be working at the box office to really get people to understand that it is propaganda. It's not a fair representation. And again, Angus, as you said, the media reporting falsely on it again, trying to paint the Sikh community as violent. It's just not right. And hey, we might see some changes now that Murdoch and his company have just paid Prince Harry, I believe it's estimated at about $12 million for their methods and their misinformation, and actually issued a public apology recently. So maybe that will give a wake-up call to the media, but I doubt it, because there's still so much competition for the clicks online now with it, and there seems to be less and less accountability when you look at online media versus the traditional.
And I think the important lesson for the Sikh community here, particularly around the diaspora, is this is working, the activism is working. If you look at the bigger picture here,
right.
Bollywood and the Indian film industry essentially is still a commercial enterprise, even though it might be driven by an RSS agenda, a lot of it. It's still a commercial enterprise. It's got to make money. If films like this are bombing through activism and campaigning by the diaspora around the world, somebody, an accountant in Bollywood is going to say, guys, we can't just keep producing films like this because we're losing money. We're losing a lot of money. In other words, this activism is changing the agenda. It's preventing propaganda like Emergency being produced, because ultimately the world is run by money and is run by accountants. And so if this activism hits them where it hurts, films like this will then stop being made, despite the political agenda behind it. So do keep up that activism. Well done to the diaspora activists. Well done to the Sikh community for this. It's really working, as you said, James, when you look at the statistics, you look at the numbers, it's having an impact. So well done. Okay, we're running out of time.
If you really need to get out and see Bollywood movie, check out Good Indian Boy. It's a rom-com that's highly anticipated with its release, and you might even see yours truly in some of the background of the scenes. So you never know.
Indeed, we'll have a look out for that one, James. Okay, I'm going to move on now because we're running well over time. I just want to go into my second story. This is an important story, and we talked about Baba Surat Singh Khalsa, who passed away a few days ago. And of course, Baba Surat Singh Khalsa has been an extraordinary figure in the community, particularly for the Khalistan movement. He's been an activist. He passed away at the age of 91 after a prolonged a prolonged hunger strike, striking against the Bandi Sikhs, the Sikhs who remain in prison despite their sentences already having expired. He's been protesting against so much of India, the Indian government's evils and its dismissal of the rule of law, its persecution of the Sikh community. He's campaigned for so many issues, not least the Khalistan issue, Jagtar Singh Johal, etc. And he did pass away after a lifetime of, I have to say, of abuse by the Indian state. We talked about him being force-fed in his hospital bed, being essentially tied to his hospital bed and force-fed by the state, and force-fed steroidal medicine which destroyed his body. And incredible. And again, it's an incredible tribute to his physical and mental stamina that he got to the grand old age of 91 while still suffering under the state abuse that he suffered. So an extraordinary character, a fabulous character who leaves an enormous legacy, and the tributes have of course been pouring in for him. But I just wanted to quickly cover this story about this whole element of his funeral. His funeral has actually now been announced for Sunday, January the 26th. And I did, as part of this, I actually did, and again, James, as part of our educational journey on Sikhi and the culture of Sikhi and the traditions and heritage of Sikhi and what goes on in, for example, at a funeral. I did want to look through this and just understand what the process, the typical process of, for example, a Sikh funeral would be. Because, of course, I keep seeing all these Punjabi words sort of thrown around saying, well, we'll be doing certain ardas and this and that and the other. I thought, well, let's for certainly our non-Sikh audience, and indeed perhaps even members of our Sikh audience who actually might not be aware of some of the finer details of this. I thought I'd just quickly, just to give a very brief summary of what it's all about and what happens. And one of the parts of this is Baba Surat Singh Khalsa. Of course, he's very often referred to as Baba, and quite often I see the word Bapu. And I thought, what does this actually mean? And so again, as part of our educational journey, in Sikhism, the term Baba, which I've seen attributed to many great Sikhs, particularly elderly Sikhs who've had lifetimes of campaigning, who have been highly revered, they're quite often referred to as Baba. Now, Baba is often used as a term of endearment and respect for spiritual leaders, especially for those who've played a significant role in the development and spread of Sikhism. Baba literally means father or grandfather in Punjabi and is used as a term of affection and respect for elders. And Bapu, and quite often Bapa, which I've seen also, means father or father-like elderly kins. You may call such a person as a token of respect to a person even if he's not your biological father. So James, there are two words that we have learned, Baba and Bapu, meaning father and grandfather, which we often is often attributed to gentlemen like Surat Singh Khalsa. So that explains where the Baba comes from. Now, in the poster that's circulating about his funeral, it does say that the Antim Saskar will start at 11 a.m. Langar, which of course is where everybody sits down in the Gurdwara, side by side as equals, sits cross-legged on the floor and shares food. So Langar will occur. Bog and Antim Ardas will occur from 2 p.m. Now, again, part of our educational journey, Bog and Antim Ardas, what on earth does that mean? So this is what led into, okay, let's understand what these mean. Now, Simran, which will happen, it means meditating on the name of God. Sikhism is a distinct faith whereby God can be realised purely through individual devotion without subjection to rites and rituals by priests or other intermediates. Now, Bog, B-H-O-G, the term Bog is used in the Sikh religion for observances that are fulfilled along with the reading of the concluding, this is the end part of the Sri Guru Granth Sahib Ji, the Holy Scriptures. So, looking into this, I'll just quickly read you what goes on at a typical funeral. This, I have to say, this is primarily aimed at, for example, Punjabi funerals. Now, Baba Surat Singh Khalsa's funeral is actually going to occur in the Fremont Gurdwara Sahib in Stockton in California, but of course Sikhi is rooted in the Punjab, so a lot of this description relates to actually what is probably more practical, should we say, in the Punjab than in California or, for example, Birmingham here in the UK or Toronto, wherever in Canada, Jed. So and this actually gives an interesting insight into how Sikhi treats death as a process as well. To a Sikh, or Sikh, birth and death are closely associated because they're both part of the cycle of human life, Ava Guyan, which is seen as a transient stage towards nirvana, complete unity with God. Sikhs thus believe in reincarnation. Mourning is therefore discouraged, especially in the case of those who've lived a long and full life. The death ceremony may be split into two parts: Saskar, the cremation, and the Antim Ardas, the final prayer at the end of the bog ceremony. So at a Sikh's deathbed, relatives and friends read Sukhmani Sahib, the Psalm of Peace, composed by the fifth Guru, Arjan Dev Ji, to console themselves and the dying person. When a death occurs, they exclaim, Waheguru, the wonderful Lord. Wailing, this is important, this is a big part of this, wailing or lamentation is discouraged. For cremation, the body is first washed and dressed with clean clothes, complete with the 5 Ks, in the case of baptised Sikhs, Amrit Dari Sikhs. If the death occurs in a hospital, the body is taken home for viewing before the funeral. In the Punjab, the body will be burnt on a funeral pyre, but in Western countries, crematorium are used. A prayer is said before the start of the funeral to seek salvation for the departed soul. On arrival at the crematorium, a brief speech about the deceased is generally given, the Sahila, bedtime prayer, is recited, and the Ardas, a formal prayer, is offered. The eldest son or a close relative generally does the cremation. Where the cremation isn't possible, disposal of the dead body by placing it in the sea or river is permitted. Sadly, that's not common here in the UK, in London, or in the West. That's probably obviously related more to India and Indian locations or Punjabi locations. At the end of the cremation, the member of the funeral party return to their homes, and the ashes are collected and later disposed of by immersion in the nearest river or sea. So again, very symbolic, this. Some families living outside India prefer to take the ashes to the Punjab itself. Sikhs do not erect monuments over the remains of the dead. Now, the second part is called the Antim Ardas. This is the final prayer during the bog ceremony, which includes a complete reading of the Guru Granth Sahib Ji, either at home or in the Gurdwara. And this is called a Sahaj Path and is usually completed within 10 days. If the family can read, they must take part in the reading, and if they can't, they must sit and listen to it. The reading is meant to provide spiritual support and consolation to the bereaved family and friends. During Ardas, the blessing of God for the departed soul is sought. The Gurus emphasise the remembrance of God's name as the best means of consolation for the bereaved family. Sikhs are always exhorted to submit to and have complete faith in the will of God, called Bana Munna. Generally, all the relatives and friends of the family gather together for the bog ceremony. Musicians sing appropriate hymns. Salokas of the 9th Guru Tegh Bahadur are read, and Ramkali Sad, the call of God, is recited. And after the final prayer, a random reading or hukam is taken, and Kara Parshad is distributed to the congregation. Now, if the deceased person is elderly, food from the Guru's kitchen, langar, again back to this wonderful protocol of langar, is served. Right. Presents are distributed to grandchildren. So again, it's more of a celebration. Donations are often announced for charities and religious organisations. Sometimes at the end of the bog, the eldest member is presented with a turban and declared the new head of the family. So again, a very symbolic passing of that head of the family sort of process. Now, and then it sums up, and this is an interesting insight into the fundamental beliefs of Sikhi. Mourning and wailing after death is not appreciated in Sikhism. After death, the near ones do weep and cry. There is siapa. Now, according to Sikh Ret Mariada, when someone shuffles off the mortal coil, the survivors must not grieve or raise a hue and cry or indulge in breastbeating. To induce a mood of resignation to God's will, it is desirable to recite Gabani or repeat Waheguru, God. Excessive show of grief is contrary to Sikh teachings. Weeping, crying, siapa or wailing is prohibited in Sikhism. Sikhism recommends that spiritual and emotional consolation in grief must be found through singing or listening of Shabad Kirtan and by reciting Gabani. The emphasis is made on Nam Simran or meditation. So I think, James, this is actually a fascinating insight into the fundamental belief of Sikhi. It's all about the cycle of life. It doesn't see death. Death is not an end. It is part of an endless cycle. This is why they believe in reincarnation. When you die, Again, it's the will of God. It's not the end of something. It's not a reason to be sad and upset and to wail and to grieve and to cry loudly and to mourn. It is a time almost of celebration. Look, it's just another process. It's a transition. It is moving on to that next cycle, in that next part of the cycle, in the cycle of life. So there's no reason to mourn. That person has moved on to the next part of that cycle. So I think that, again, it's all about dignity, and again, it's all about the celebrating God, Waheguru. And again, this meditation element. Instead of mourning, you meditate on the glory of God. You meditate on the glory of this process, this gift of life, and this gift of the cycle of life, because that person is going to be reincarnated to live another life. So I think, James, in that, it's as part of our learning journey, I think this is a fascinating insight into the mindset and the understanding of how Sikhi treats, again, what is just a fundamental part of life, which is death. We're all going to suffer it, or at least go through it, every single one of us without exception.
Absolutely. I found that quite fascinating, Angus, and very enlightening. It's definitely something that we look at. And of course, in the Western world, we look at it a bit differently. But yeah, no, that's just fascinating to me. And it really does make a lot of sense. And it really shows how they honor those who deserve it.
Absolutely, I think that is the word. It's all about honouring somebody's life and not mourning the fact they're dying, because it's not an ending. It is just that person who's lived an honourable life is now moving on to the next phase, and it is all thanks to the glory of Waheguru, of God. So, a fascinating insight on that one. So, interested in our audience's thoughts on that. It is a fascinating window into what Sikhi is all about, and actually, the goodness of Sikhi. So, okay, James, we are actually way over time again, as always. So let's quickly move on to. We've got a few comments this time around, and again, we'll rush through this thanks to the pressure of time. Jat Jadanda says American nationals and Canadian nationals from Indian descent are being harassed in airports in India. Maybe try being hospitable would actually earn you more goodwill than ill will. And I think this is quite a scary insight. If this is genuinely happening, James, in India, is that if you're an American or a Canadian citizen from Indian descent and you pass through an Indian airport, clearly you're having a bit of a hard time. And as Jat Dadanda says, to India, if you want to actually earn global respect, then start treating citizens who are in the diaspora with a little bit more respect. Because if you start harassing people, all that's going to do is spread a bad reputation about India. And that's clearly what's happening.
Yeah, absolutely. And maybe it's part jealousy, maybe it's just part ignorance, but at the same time, it's especially when you're trying to encourage more revenue for your country, and tourism can play a major role in that. So it's not just of the of the Canadians and the Americans, it's everybody. So
yeah, I think that's a key point. India is traditionally quite a high tourist location. It does actually have a large number of global tourists. But if stories like this get out, people are going to start saying, I don't think I want to visit India, because clearly it's got issues. Well, James, we often talk about, as much as we'd love to visit India, I genuinely would be scared to now land in India if I was going on holiday, because of the prevailing threat to anybody who dares speak out against the Indian government.
Well, my invitation's always there to fly over and meet with Modi and do an interview with him and ask him why his head's so far up his ass, but we'll leave that for another day.
I'm glad you said that and I didn't. Nirmal Singh says, thanks boys, you deserve to live in Khalistan. We will receive you guys with open arms. Khalistan Zindabad, love Australia. Well, thank you, Nirmal, for that lovely comment. And I think it's an absolute honour to say that we deserve to live in Khalistan. We're certainly doing, hopefully, our little bit in its own small way. And it will be an absolute honour and a privilege to certainly go visit at least Khalistan, James. And as we keep saying, we are looking forward to broadcasting our first show on Independence Day.
Absolutely. And hey, we can always visit Australia too. Why not? We'll make it a whirlwind world tour.
Indeed. Right. Akash Deep Singh. Yes, this was in response to a bit of an ongoing discussion. Thank you for your reply. I'm for Khalistan. I think that through the Khalistan referendum, we will surely obtain Khalistan. Now, this is talking about Amritpal Singh. We did talk about Amritpal Singh's new party, Shiromani Akali Dal Waris Punjab Day, which is quite a mouthful. And Akash says, I oppose the act by Amrit Pal Singh, which was to attack Christian priests in the territory of Punjab, because I think that the Sikhs and Christians are like brothers. Yeah, this is actually an important point. And I didn't know this. I didn't know, I wasn't aware that Amrit Pal Singh had actually attacked the Christian community. And if he'd had, I think this is not a good move on his part. I think this is a silly thing to do, if indeed it's true. And I haven't corroborated this. Because actually, and again, it actually goes against the teachings and the principles of Sikhi, which is to view everybody from all communities as equals and with due respect. And actually, I have to say, I would be astonished if Amrit Pal Singh had been, or certainly had attacked Christian priests. Maybe he said something which is, maybe it was an attack of some sorts. How do you define attack? I don't know. At the end of the day, we're all human. We are all going to criticise other people within humanity. But ultimately, if he is anti-Christian, and I don't believe he is, that is a problem. And I think I would certainly have a problem, not even with a Christian background. I think if he attacked any community outside the Sikh community, I think he would stand himself up for criticism, and he would not be standing up for Sikhi principles if he indeed did that. And if he has done that, yeah, absolutely. I actually would criticise him myself for doing that. I think he must not criticise the other communities. And it does make me wonder, what did he actually say? Has it been taken out of the context, etc., etc.? I don't know, James, but it's very clear to us. Sikhs do not go around attacking other communities.
Yeah, and I would invite that person to actually send us an email with some more details, because it's something that we definitely are interested in looking into further.
Yeah, Akash, seriously, send us an email, message at satellitetv.com. If you've got a link, share us, because I'd like to maybe follow up on that and see if Amrit Pal Singh has indeed been attacking Christian priests verbally, obviously. I'd be interested to know what he actually said. But yeah, the response that from experts, motivation and lack birais, as I couldn't say it better, James, Khalistan Zindabad.
Exactly.
And we do actually, for those of you who might not be aware on our channel, we do actually produce a lot of shorts, which are little excerpts from our Perspectives show and from Surinder Singh's shows as well. Lots of shorts which come out on a daily basis. Do keep an eye out for those. Of course, we do get loads of comments on the shorts, which I tend not to dip into just through the pressure of time. But I thought I'd just at least pick a couple out that have appeared recently. And one of the shorts, which when we talked about our new Donald Trump era, and we talked about this element of is he going to focus on business or human rights? But SKP 2013 said Modi is also subservient to Adani and Ambani and co. And I think this again points to something that we talk about a lot, James, is this links between Narendra Modi and the billionaires, the well-known Indian billionaires, the likes of Adani and the Reliance Industries, the Ambanis of the world. Is Modi subservient, or is he a partner? I think he's just a facilitator. Certainly, clearly has very strong links to these billionaires. And one wonders, like many people in his power, and I can think of several around the world, and I even look at Zelensky in Ukraine as a prime example of this, who are going to leave their political posts and probably disappear into obscurity, but with very, very large bank accounts. And one wonders where that money has come from. And I think Narendra Modi will probably leave office with a very, very healthy bank account. And one has to ask, and we will never know, where those large deposits have come from. James, I guess you're along the same lines on that one.
Absolutely. And just on the political realm, just a quick update for our viewers is that I did hear back from Jagmeet Singh's one of his assistants. So we are working on setting up a sit down with him. So just a quick update on that. Fantastic
news. We look forward to that. Let's hope we can secure an interview there. And final comment on the Bapu Surat Singh Khalsa story. I couldn't sum this up any better. Gagandeep Sidhu says, absolutely right. Khalistan is the only answer. And I think this links into all our stories today, James, and particularly the stories about the dreadful endemic cultural problem in Indian society, about this dreadful treatment of women, the sexual attacks that are just occurring on a daily basis across India. I think, as we often talk about, the Sikh religion, the Sikh community have always, from the very beginnings of its religion, has treated women as equals on every level. And unfortunately, as I say, it's going to take a generation or more, that's even with a will, to change Indian culture. The only solution is a separate independent Khalistan that will become a haven for women, literally, where they will be welcomed and recognised as equal. Khalistan will open its arms to people of all backgrounds, all ethnicities, all cultures, all religions, including Hindus. And I'm sure many, many Hindu women will actually see Khalistan as a safe haven, a place where they know they can move to, and they will actually be able to live a normal life without fear of attack from evil men, from a culture that treats them as a second-class citizen, James.
That's right. Absolutely, Angus. I can't say it better myself.
Indeed. Khalistan is the only answer. Thank you for that comment. But on that note, we are over time as always, so we must draw perspectives to a close for another day. Thank you so much for all your comments. They have been pouring in, particularly after that last story yesterday. So thank you for all your contributions. They've been absolutely superb. Very interesting reading some of them. Loads of supportive comments. Thank you for all those. Don't forget, you can message us directly if there's something you'd like to alert us to, if you've seen an interesting story or something that we might have got wrong or whatever. Do message us directly at message@satellitv.com. We do like to receive your emails, so thank you for those that we have received thus far. But in the meantime, it is the end of another show for Perspectives for another day. It is a goodbye from me. It is a goodbye from James.
Stay safe, everyone.
You have, of course, been watching Perspectives. We will see you next time.